Welcome back, everybody. We are diving deep today into Mark chapter 12.
Oh, yeah, Mark 12.
You sent over some excerpts from Mark 12, and it looks like we've got parables, teachings about taxes and resurrection.
Yeah.
And even some pointed commentary about religious leaders.
Lots of good stuff in Mark 12.
Yeah, this is going to be good.
It is a really, I think, fascinating chapter just in terms of how much is packed in there and all the different ways that that Jesus is teaching. You know, he uses these sort of veiled stories.
Right.
But then also these really direct confrontations with people's assumptions and worldviews.
Okay, so let's jump right into it with this parable, the parable of the vineyard. This is in Mark 12.112.
Okay.
And it starts off like a simple story about a vineyard owner and some tenant farmers. But it takes a dark turn pretty fast.
Right. And I think what's important to remember with this parable is that Jesus isn't just like telling a random story here.
Yeah.
There's a lot of symbolism packed in. So the vineyard represents Israel. The owner is God. The tenants are, you know, the people in charge, the religious leaders.
Yeah.
And then the son, well, that's Jesus himself.
Got it.
So he's setting up this whole, you know, symbolic world. But then he puts these characters into a situation that really escalates in terms of violence and rejection.
Yeah.
Which is interesting.
Yeah. And those tenants, they aren't exactly model citizens. They start mistreating the owner's servants, even killing some of them.
Right.
And then ultimately they murder the son.
Yeah.
Pretty brutal picture of rejection.
Yeah, and it's meant to be, he's kind of highlighting the way that God's messengers, you know, we can think back to the Old Testament, the prophets were often met with resistance, violence. And now he's facing the same opposition himself.
Yeah.
So he's drawing this parallel between how they treated the prophets and how they're treating him.
It's a pretty pointed critique.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. This is not subtle at all.
And he even, he doesn't let them miss the point. He even quotes Psalm 118.22 saying, "The stone the builders rejected has become the cornerstone." He's basically saying, you might be rejecting me, but I'm actually essential to God's plan.
Right, like you think you're getting rid of me, but actually this is all part of God's design. And it says that they, you know, they wanted to arrest him right there, but they were afraid of the crowd. So you can imagine how well that went over.
Yeah, not too well.
So this really kind of sets the stage for this escalating conflict between Jesus and the authorities.
So after that tense encounter, things shift gears a little bit. We go from a symbolic story to a real-life dilemma in Mark 12.14-17.
Okay.
Now we've got the Pharisees and the Herodians trying to trap Jesus with this tricky question about taxes.
Ah, yes.
I love this part.
Yeah. To really understand this question, I think we need to remember a bit of the context. So the Pharisees were all about strict adherence to Jewish law, and they really resented Roman rule. The Herodians, on the other hand, they were more, they supported Herod, who was a puppet king appointed by Rome. So they're coming from very different places.
So they come together, right, and they ask Jesus this question: is it lawful to pay taxes to Caesar? They're basically trying to back him into a corner, right? If he says yes, he looks like he's siding with the Roman oppressors. If he says no, he's like inciting rebellion against Rome.
Lose-lose situation.
It's such a mess.
It's brilliant.
I don't know how he,
I know. It's like, how do you get out of it?
I know. So what do you do?
Well, Jesus, being Jesus, he navigates this with incredible wisdom and grace. He responds, "Give to Caesar what is Caesar's and to God what is God's."
Boom. Mic drop. That's such a brilliant answer.
It's so good.
He's not saying, you know, ignore your earthly obligations, but he's also making it really clear that our like ultimate allegiance belongs to God.
Right. It's about recognizing different spheres of authority.
Yeah.
You know, we all have responsibilities to our government, employers, family, but ultimately, yeah, we answer to a higher power.
Yeah.
And I think that's a principle that's just as relevant for us today as it was back then.
Okay. So before we move on, I want to make sure I'm tracking. We've got this parable about a vineyard.
Right.
That's really a commentary on how God's people have rejected his messengers.
Yep.
Culminating in the rejection of Jesus himself.
Right.
And then we have this real life trap about taxes.
Yes.
Where Jesus basically says, respect earthly authority, but don't forget who's really in charge.
You got it. That's a great summary.
Okay, good. I'm glad I'm following.
And the plot thickens. As we move into even more debates and challenges, we're in Mark 12.1834.
Boy.
This time, Jesus finds himself going head-to-head with the Sadducees, another group of religious leaders.
Okay.
And the topic is resurrection. Now, the Sadducees, they were a group that didn't believe in the resurrection of the dead. Okay.
So They try to discredit this idea by throwing a pretty wild hypothetical at Jesus.
Okay, hold on. Before you get into the specifics, I gotta ask.
Yeah.
How did these different groups, like the Pharisees and Sadducees, even get along with each other? It seems like they disagreed on some pretty major points.
Well, let's just say their relationship was complicated.
I can imagine.
Think of it like maybe different political parties today. You know, you have some common ground, but then you have some fundamental disagreements that can lead to some pretty heated debates.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what we see happening here with Jesus and the Sadducees. They bring up this hypothetical scenario about a woman who's married to 7 brothers, one after the other.
Wait, what? That's a lot of husbands.
It is.
What's the point of that?
Their point is to make the idea of resurrection seem absurd.
Okay.
So they ask Jesus, you know, okay, so if there is a resurrection, who will this woman be married to in the afterlife?
Uh-huh.
It's meant to create this image of chaos and confusion
Okay.
in the world to come. So they're trying to paint resurrection as this like ridiculous concept,
Right, exactly.
hoping to expose what they see as a flaw in Jesus' teachings.
Yeah.
So how does Jesus respond to that?
Well, he doesn't take their bait at all. Instead, he points out that they're misunderstanding both the scriptures and God's power. So he reminds them that God described himself to Moses as the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob,
Okay.
even though they had died long ago.
Right.
So Jesus is implying that their relationship with God continues even after death.
So he's not getting bogged down in the details of like what resurrection looks like or who's married to whom.
Right.
He's just affirming the core truth that our connection to God goes beyond, you know, the limits of our earthly existence.
Exactly. And it's so fascinating that, you know, right after this really heated exchange, we get this this really beautiful moment of genuine connection.
Yeah.
An expert in the law comes to Jesus. He seems to be genuinely seeking understanding, and he asks Jesus about the most important commandment. And Jesus, in Mark 12.29-31, gives that famous answer, to love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and to love your neighbor as yourself.
It's such a simple but profound distillation of the entire, like, law and the prophets.
It really is. It's amazing.
Yeah. You know what always strikes me about this passage is that the expert in the law actually agrees with Jesus.
Right.
It's like, even in the midst of all this debate and tension, there's this shared recognition of what truly matters.
Yeah, it's a good reminder that, you know, even amidst disagreements, common ground can be found when there's a genuine desire for truth and understanding.
So we've gone from a parable with hidden meanings to a tax trap, to a debate about resurrection, to like this beautiful conversation about the greatest commandment.
It's a lot.
Mark 12 is like a roller coaster
Yeah.
of different teaching styles and encounters.
Mark 12 keeps you on your toes.
I'm sure there's more to come.
Oh, definitely. In the next part, things get even more intense as Jesus directly confronts the hypocrisy of some religious leaders. You won't want to miss it.
Okay, so we're back, and you said things are about to get intense.
Oh yeah, buckle up. Jesus doesn't hold back in this next section. He starts directly challenging the religious leaders, like calling them out for their hypocrisy.
Okay.
So this is in Mark 12.35-37. He kind of picks up on that earlier question about the Messiah being David's son and turns it into a teaching moment.
Okay, so remind me, what's the issue with the Messiah being David's son? I thought everybody agreed on that.
Right. So the idea that the Messiah would come from David's line, you know, that's rooted in prophecy. But Jesus points out that David himself, inspired by the Holy Spirit, calls the Messiah Lord in Psalm 110.
Okay.
So there's this interesting tension there.
Yeah, I'm starting to see the problem. If David called the Messiah Lord, how could he also be just his descendant?
Exactly. That's the point Jesus is making.
It seems kind of contradictory.
Right. He's using David's own words to show that there's more to the Messiah than meets the eye. It's like you think you know who the Messiah is, but you're missing something crucial.
Right, like the Messiah is more than just a human king. There's something more going on.
Exactly.
Okay, so how do the experts react to that?
Well, Mark doesn't tell us their specific reaction, but you can imagine it wasn't well received. And then Jesus shifts gears and starts talking about the hypocrisy of some of the religious leaders. This is in Mark 12.38-40.
Okay, so what does he say? This sounds like this is where things get really heated.
Yeah, he doesn't mince words. He calls out their love for outward displays of piety, things like wearing fancy robes and demanding the best seats in the synagogues.
Oh, yeah.
Really wanting that public recognition and honor.
Right, right.
He accuses them of using their religious positions for personal gain, exploiting vulnerable people like widows.
Wow. That's a pretty bold statement.
That's rough.
To publicly call out these powerful, religious figures.
Yeah.
Yeah, this actually reminds me of the parable of the vineyard, where the tenants abused their authority and ended up rejecting, the owner's son.
That's a great connection. I think you're right. Both the parable and this direct condemnation highlight the danger of religious authority being misused for personal gain.
Yeah.
It's a reminder that true faith isn't about outward appearances or social status. It's about what's in your heart and how you treat other people.
Yeah, this really makes me think about those do as I say, not as I do kind of situations.
No, for sure.
It's easy to get caught up in the externals of religion and miss the point entirely.
Absolutely. And that's why I think the next story is so powerful.
Okay.
The story of the widow's offering. This is Mark 12.41-44. It's such a powerful contrast to what Jesus has just condemned.
Okay, set the scene for us. What's happening?
Okay, so Jesus is sitting near the temple treasury, and he's watching people put in their offerings. You can imagine, a lot of wealthy folks kind of making a big show of their generosity, putting in large sums to impress everyone.
Right.
But then this poor widow comes along, and she puts in just 2 tiny copper coins, practically nothing compared to what the rich people are giving.
Yeah, and Jesus points that out, right?
He does. He calls his disciples over and tells them that she has given more than all those rich people combined.
Wait, hold on. How is that possible? I mean, her offering, it seems like it would be barely noticeable compared to all the others.
Right. But Jesus explains it's because the rich were giving out of their abundance, their surplus wealth.
Yeah.
But the widow, she gave everything she had.
Wow.
Even though it meant sacrificing her own livelihood.
Yeah, this story, it really makes me think, what are some of the ways we might be holding back in our own generosity? Is it fear or pride? Maybe just not noticing the needs around us.
That's such a good question. It's so easy to fall into that trap of comparing our giving to others or, focusing on the amount rather than the motivation behind it.
Right.
This story really challenges us to rethink our whole approach to generosity.
So we've seen Jesus teach through parables, answer tricky questions, and even directly confront those in authority.
It's amazing.
It's like Mark 12 is showing us all these different facets of Jesus.
Yeah.
As a teacher and leader.
Absolutely. And I think it highlights how his teachings often challenge the status quo, push people to think differently about their relationship with God and with each other.
Okay, so is there more, or is this the end of Mark 12?
We're not done yet.
Oh, okay.
There's one more crucial encounter in Mark 12 that we haven't touched on yet.
Okay.
And it's one that's puzzled and intrigued readers for centuries.
Ooh, lay it on us. What's this mysterious encounter all about?
Well, a scribe, an expert in Jewish law, comes to Jesus with a question that seems straightforward, but it leads to a truly profound exchange about the identity of the Messiah.
All right, you've got my attention. Let's dive into this final encounter and unravel its mysteries when we get back for part 3 of our deep dive into Mark 12. Okay, we're back. Ready to tackle this last encounter in Mark 12.
Yeah, let's do it.
You said it involved a scribe and some, profound stuff about the Messiah.
Yeah, this is in Mark 12.2834. So, we've seen all these intense debates and challenges, but now, a scribe, an expert in Jewish law, he comes up to Jesus, and he doesn't seem to be trying to trap him or anything. It's more like he's genuinely curious.
Okay.
And he asks this question: which commandment is the most important of all?
Ah, that's a good one. How do you even begin to answer that?
Right. But Jesus, he nails it. He quotes from Deuteronomy saying, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and with all your strength.
Okay, yeah.
And then he adds another one from Leviticus, love your neighbor as yourself.
Love God, love your neighbor. It's so simple, yet it's so profound.
I know, right? And it's interesting because the scribe, he totally gets it. He says to Jesus, well said, teacher. You are right in saying that God is one, and there is no other but him. To love him with all your heart, with all your understanding, and with all your strength, and to love your neighbor as yourself is more important than all burnt offerings and sacrifices.
So there's this moment of agreement, even amidst all the tension and disagreement.
Exactly. It's like they both recognize this core truth, this heart of what it means to follow God. And it's not about rituals or rules or trying to impress anyone. It's about love. Love for God and love for others.
It makes you wonder what would happen if we all just focused on those two things, love God, love people. What a different world it would be.
Absolutely. I think that's the challenge and the invitation that Mark 12 leaves us with. It's easy to get caught up in debates and arguments and miss the heart of what Jesus is teaching. But at the end of the day, it all comes back to love.
Yeah. This deep dive into Mark 12 has been a wild ride, that's for sure. Parables, taxes, resurrection, the greatest commandment, generosity, confronting hypocrisy, love. We've covered it all.
I told you, Mark 12 keeps you on your toes.
Thanks for guiding us through it all. And everyone listening, keep diving deep into the scriptures, and let's see how we can put this love into action in our own lives.